Here we are on the banks of the Ipswich in North Reading, and here's a crowd, some of which are on a tour of the river.
Probably help you find some, okay?
Your wife's a fan?
Come down on a Saturday morning to join us for a tour of the river in the headwaters portion of the Ipswich River. Here we are standing on the banks of the Ipswich. My name is Richard Tomiczyk. I'm the watershed team leader for the Ipswich and Parker River watersheds. I'm with the state of Massachusetts. I work with the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs. I just want to have a couple of opening comments. I'll be very brief. And I'm going to turn it over to Planet's Collaborative folks to talk about the agenda today and some information that they're going to talk about and that you'll see today on the tour. But I think the thing I want to say most today is to thank everyone who's come out to join us on this and this important event. Take a look at the river this time of the year. I might note that even though the water looks high this time of year, we're down about 50% for the river flow. I just looked at the stream gauge data this morning, and we're down quite a bit right now. And the groundwater as well. You folks that have some pumps and so forth, you probably already know that. But the water level is low, even though you might get an impression otherwise by going along today. We're going to come back later in the summertime and look at the river again to get another impression of it after a summer's worth of use and so forth. And I think you'll be surprised the amount of water that it drops in these short months. I want to thank Reardon Corporation for sponsoring today's event, providing us with the buses and the lunch and so forth. It's been a great help. Thanks very much. I want to say now is that we've got a lot of folks here. We're going to be on 2 buses, and we've got a very tight schedule. So we need to walk briskly from place to place. Stay attentive. We've got a lot of things to cover. And if we can have your attention the whole day, I'm sure we'll get back here as close to 1:30 as we possibly can. But right now, I just want to turn it over to the folks from Planet's Collaborative. Tim?
Morning, everybody. I'm Tim Reardon with Planners Collaborative. I'm I guess I'll be your tour guide today. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming out. This is a fantastic turnout. We really didn't expect this many people when we first conceptualized the tour, but I think it should be a lot of fun. I know I've had a lot of fun. Really found some really interesting places along the Ipswich River in researching the tour. And hopefully all of you will get to go see a place or two that maybe you haven't seen before, or you'll get to visit a place that you haven't been in a long time, and increase your appreciation for what the Ipswich River is, the vital resource that it is for the 4 towns that we're going to visit: Burlington, Reading, North Reading, and Wilmington, as well as all the towns in the Ipswich River watershed, all 22 cities and towns. And here we are on the banks of the Ipswich. It's not a mighty river, but it's important. It's a vital resource. It flows on its course from Burlington to Plum Island Sound. It supports many communities. That's what's important about it, is that many communities use this resource. There's invertebrates and fish and turtles in the river. They use the river. They live in the river. There's plants, all these plants along the bank, whole communities of ferns, shrubs, and trees. And they use the river. They live on the banks of the river, and they've adapted to its annual cycles. The birds, there's hundreds of species of birds that eat those invertebrates and fish in the river. They use the river as their home year-round, or many species use the river as they're just passing through. These are all communities that use the river. And in addition, there's also people that use the river. People use the river as a recreation resource, like they do here. It's an aesthetic resource for all the towns in the watershed. And even more important, it's a water resource. It provides water for 320,000 people, both within and outside the watershed. quite a few people. And these people, for these people, it provides drinking water. Drinking water we can't live without. It's a vital, vital resource. Like all those fish and those turtles and those birds and these plants on the shore, all those people depend on the river for their very sustenance of life, for water. And when we think about it in that light, this doesn't just look like a quiet pool, you know, a place where the river's backed up. This is a very, this is a corridor of life that runs from Burlington all the way to Plum Island Sound. And as important as it is, what is troubling about it, or is how little we know about the river, how little we understand about how it works. The U.S. Geological Survey has, they have 2 teams working on it, some of the greatest scientific minds in our country, and they're still grappling with how this river functions, how the hydrology of the river functions, how it supports all those invertebrates and turtles and fish and all the animals that live in it. They're still grappling with those with answering those questions. And when we realize how important it is to all those communities that it supports, it makes those questions much more acute. How does what we do impact all those communities, those turtles, those birds, those 320,000 people? How does what we do impact all those communities? It's a big responsibility. It's a very big responsibility for these 4 towns in the upper Ipswich watershed. These 4 towns are in the headwaters. Everything they do has repercussions all the way down the line, all the way to Plum Island Sound. The decisions that are made here, the decisions about where to build and what to build and how much water to use and when to fill your pool and how much water you use on your lawn and what types of industrial developments are allowed or not allowed, all of these decisions have repercussions all the way down the line to many, many communities. And that is what is at the heart of this project that we're involved in right now, that the Planners Collaborative is involved in. We're working with 4 cities and 4 towns in the upper watershed, Burlington, Wilmington, Reading, and North Reading. We're working with them on a project called Planning for Growth in the upper Ipswich River watershed. We're going to be looking at the work that the U.S. Geological Survey is doing. We're going to be looking at different analyses that other folks are doing. We're doing some of our own work. We're looking at the build-out analysis, how much growth can these towns support. And we're going to be trying to assess what the potential impacts on the river of all that growth might be. And more importantly, we're going to be trying to answer a very, very challenging question, which is how can these towns work together to benefit the Ipswich River? What can these 4 towns do to enhance the value of the Ipswich River and the watershed here in the upper basin and all the way downstream to Plum Island Sound? There's a lot of opportunities out there. We're going to talk about some of them today. It's very exciting. It's a great opportunity to be able, as a planner, I have to say, it's a great opportunity to be able to sit in a room with planners from 4 neighboring towns. That's wonderful. I mean, there's so much that we can do. And to have almost 100 people out here from all 4 towns, all out here, visiting the river together and interacting, that's great. And when we develop some recommendations and turn them back to you and ask for comments and work with you, the members of the communities, to develop these recommendations and then turn them back to you and say, this is going to be the job of the towns to implement these recommendations. It's very exciting to have such support this early in the process. So I'd like to thank you all for coming out. I'm very excited to be leading this tour. I hope that I'll learn a lot more about the Ipswich River today. That's what I'm excited about. We're all going to try and tell you a little bit about what we know. We've got some speakers, Dave Armstrong from the U.S. Geological Survey, Gina Snyder from US EPA, Mark Clark, Mike Woods, the Wilmington Water Supervisor, a couple other folks. They're going to be telling you some things, and also we're looking at it as an opportunity to learn from you. You know, I just heard a fellow over there, he said, well, I could probably sit down and draw you a map of every stream and brook and trickle in the whole watershed. Well, I'd love to see that, because I don't know it. And so what we would like to do is get some information from you. Have you tell us, where are those beautiful areas along the river that the tour hasn't stopped at? I'd like to know some more about that. So that said, we'd like to break here and head back to the buses. We'll head off to our first stop. That's Reardon Park in Burlington. We're going to be looking at one of the headwater streams, the Sawmill Brook. And I'd just like to reiterate a point that Rich made. It's a tight schedule today. We've got a lot of stops to make, a lot of speakers who are going to be trying to share some information with you. So to the extent possible, I'd like everyone to try and move along quickly, and hopefully we will have some opportunities at lunch and on the bus to engage in discussions. And that said, we'll see you all back at the bus, and we'll see you at Reardon Park. Up over that way somewhere, where on one side of that ridge, the water, when rain falls, it'll percolate through the ground or run off, and it'll eventually flow this way into the Ipswich River. But on the other side of that ridge, it'll flow down and through some wetlands, and it'll flow into the Shawsheen River, and it'll flow out that way. That's what a watershed is. It's all the areas that contribute to a particular river. And so 155 square miles. It's pretty big relative to how much contributes to the Sawmill Brook. Like I said, it's a bunch of different streams like this that join together to form the Ipswich Basin. And where does the water come from? It makes the Ipswich River what it is. Of course, it comes from rainwater, precipitation. It's the only source of water we have, really. Water that comes out of the sky. That evaporates off of lakes and ponds and off of the ocean into the clouds and rains down. 42 inches every year. That's how much rain this area gets. About 42 or 42 and a half inches a year. Inches of rain, inches of precipitation every year. Some of that's snow, some of that's rain, that's probably sleet. Pretty much that's what you get. So it's 42 inches. And if you look on your handout, there's on the second page there's a term that says available water budget. And that, I believe, is, what's that number, 230 million gallons? Now, the water budget, what's a water budget? The water budget is if you take all that rain that falls into the watershed, how much water is that? It flows through the water, it flows through the watershed, comes in. How much water does the Ipswich River watershed have to spend? That's why we call it a budget. The water comes in from the sky, and it's got to be spent somehow. Now that first line, the next line there, is the amount that's taken up by plants. It's almost half of all the water that falls into the watershed. up by plants, like these maples here, all these shrubs along the brook, all the grasses. The water is actually taken up from the ground by the plants and released into the air through the process of photosynthesis. That's one of the things that plants do. They take up water and they release it into the air. So there's a lot of water. That's almost 50% of the water budget is taken up by plants. The rest goes down into the ground and enters into the aquifer. Actually, pretty much all the water that falls goes into the aquifer. Some of it comes back up it's taken up by plants. Now, what do we mean when we talk about the aquifer? What is the Ipswich River aquifer? The aquifer is all rock, gravel, sand, clay, all the deposits underneath us that hold water. Between 100,000 and 20 or 15,000 years ago, glaciers came through this area and they scraped the entire area down to bedrock, and then they left what are called unconsolidated deposits. It's just sand and gravel, clay, cobbles, and boulders. Unconsolidated deposits, because they're not packed together, they had up a lot of what's called pore space. You put sand or cobbles or pebbles into a glass, you can't fill up the whole glass. You can still put some water in. That's what the Ipswich River water should be. That's what the aquifer is. The aquifer is not the rocks, but it's all the spaces between the rocks. So when water falls into the basin, it falls down and it fills up all those spaces between the rocks, and then slowly it drains out. Drains out into the lowest point. Where's the lowest point? Right here? Right at the water. Right in the river. That's how rivers work. The water will drain out into the river and flow out to the ocean. Now if you take out what's taken up by plants, you come up with about what's the number? 120 million gallons. That's how much is available to run off, and pretty much that's what people are drawing from when they draw from the river, draw from surface water supply, or when they take water out of the ground through wells. That's where that water is coming from. So when we take water out of the ground to drink it, fill pools or water lawns, that's where that water comes from that available water. And what happens to that available water? Well, we take anywhere between the cities and towns that use Ipswich for drinking water, they use somewhere between 25 and 30 million gallons per day. And of that amount, actually almost 3/4 of that leaves the watershed. It doesn't go back into the river. It's taken out. It comes out in groundwater, where they take it from surface water, and it ends up leaving the basin. It leaves as drinking water, and it's drunk by people in towns and people in other communities outside the basin who don't have the same water resources that Ipswich has. They need to get their water from somewhere else. They don't have aquifers, so they need to take that water from the Ipswich basin, or else it's used by towns within the basin, and then it leaves as wastewater. It goes to Deer Island. It goes through the MWRA pipes and is released to the ocean through Deer Island into the alcohol pipe. That's the flow of water. All that water that comes in, that 240 million gallons, that every day, that 42 inches of rain, that all needs to go somewhere. That's the water budget. The question is how that water budget gets spent. Some of it gets spent by plants, some of it gets spent by people, some of it goes into Sawmill Brook, goes into Maple Meadow Brook, goes into Lover's Brook, and then eventually joins. And then that's the Ipswich River. And as the Ipswich River goes down, it continues to pull water from the aquifer, and it flows downstream. So that's hydrology 101 of the Ipswich River. Is there any questions? The average is all the cities and towns that use the Ipswich River as a water resource are permitted to use up to 32 million gallons a day. Now that's averaged out over the year. Usage is higher in the summer and lower in the winter. But the average is 32 million gallons per day is what people are permitted to use. But they actually use very little. varies from 25 up to 30 years. There's some excess capacity in what's permitted, but the question, now it's a much more difficult question if you say, is there more water that people can pull out of the basin? Well, there's more water. We haven't spent all that available water budget. But what impact does that have? What impact might that have on the river? What impact might that have on people's flow? Welcome to the Wilmington Water Treatment Facility. This is pretty self-explanatory. To tell us a little more, here's Mike Woods, the water superintendent for the town of Wilmington.
Hey folks, just here to explain a little bit about what we do here in Wilmington at this water treatment plant, and also the other one. And is it on?
Yeah.
Let's try this again. Hello? John, can you hear me? Okay. What we're going to talk about here is wells, withdrawals, and I get down in my mouth, see if that helps. We're talking about water supply, wells, and withdrawals. Well, you're going to need to turn it up because I don't yell any louder. How's that?
Better.
You can step closer to it if anybody has any particular hearing difficulties. Okay, again, we're going to start with water supply, wells, and withdrawals from the Ipswich River. What I'm in charge of doing here in town is supplying town with drinking water for the residents and also the commercial industrial base. Our water supply has been pulled from the Ipswich Basin since 1927. Wells located in the north side of town would be ones that were first installed at that time. There's 3 of them, and then another well had been installed in the west side of town. And then at that point we put in 5 more wells down in this side of town, which are very close to where we're standing here today. We service 22,000 residents, as well as the industrial commercial base, and we do that with 7,000 connections to the system. Wells are, we have 9 groundwater wells to meet the needs of the town, and 3 of them are treated at the Sergeant Water Treatment Plant. The remaining wells are treated at this water treatment plant here. The 9 active wells in town are capable of producing 7 million gallons of water per day. But we have a water management permit that is issued by the state, and they allow us to withdraw 3.56 million gallons per day. On average, the town withdraws 3.1 million gallons per day. But during the summertime, when people are turning on sprinklers at home and going outdoors a little more often, upwards of 5.3 million gallons per day to meet demand. Residential usage runs about 60% of that number, and the remaining 40% is the commercial industrial base. Having said that, I will tell you that both residential and commercial growth in town is continuing at a fairly rapid rate, and we need to be looking for new water supplies in the very near future. And those options are bedrock wells in both the Ipswich River and the Shawshene River basins, as well as interconnections with other towns. And there is also a possibility of an interconnection with the MWRA. These things are all being looked at. No conclusions have been drawn, but we'll have them studied and restudied before we make any final decisions. Going to take any questions?
Mike, what's the capacity the town has right now, and what's the most you pump during a heavy day in the summer?
Capacity of the plants and water supply we have here is about 7 million gallons per day. Our water management permit will only allow us to pump 3.56 million gallons per day on average over the course of the year, which comes to about 1.3 billion gallons a year. We pump about 1.2 billion gallons a year now.
Is it commercial, industrial space? Do they use more water in the summer as well, or just residential?
No, they're equal. They're watering their lawns and other things. And, cooling and watering lawns are probably the biggest uses in the summertime.
Has Wilmington had to put water restrictions into effect?
Prior to 1991, we had a lot of water restrictions in place. Once the Sizen water treatment plant was up and running, we had to put water restrictions on last summer due to the drought situation. We had to go and ask for a voluntary odd-even watering ban for outdoor water uses. When we did that, we reduced the water consumption rate by about 250,000 gallons a day.
What percentage of sewage septic?
That's actually a very difficult number to nail down because we can do it based on connections, we can do it based on water flow in and out of the... If we look at connections only, we're looking at about 15% of the town is sewer. But if we actually look at it, how much water the town uses over the course of the day versus how much water would flow out of town by way of MWRA, it's about 50%.
So what is the actual filtration process? How does it get from the river to like
The 9 wells that I spoke of earlier, they're connected to pipelines in the streets that are called groundwater mains. And then water is transported either here or the side of the water treatment plant up in Hathaway. When it goes to this plant, the first thing it does is it goes in on this side of the plant, and all you hear is an aerator. Carbon dioxide, volatile organic compounds, if there are any, are driven off. Then there's some chemicals added for flocculation purposes. They adjust pH, cause all the particles, dirt, that sort of thing, to get into bigger pieces. Then it goes into a sedimentation basin where those bigger pieces settle out. And then it goes to a carbon filter where the water is polished, clean, and any possible volatile organic compound that may still be in the water is removed from that carbon filter. And its pH is adjusted, it's chlorinated, and it goes out of the system and then finished water mains. Same way everybody has
Mike, are these beds over here still in use, and you want to explain what they are?
These beds here.
Yeah.
These beds are only for backwash water purposes. What happens is the carbon filters they get clogged up with all these particles and sediments. So this time of year, about every couple of days, we run the filters in reverse, clean water, raise the bed, expand it, scour over there, and all those sediments are pumped out into this pond, which is lined and solids settle out. Once a year, we dry it out and clean all those sediments out. It's really just sand and iron and things that move from the water.
In the future, if we run out of fresh water to use for like the toilet and everything
This process is actually used in some other parts of the country, mostly down southwest and west. But there could come a day where that would be a viable option up here in the Northeast.
During August, is the water being pumped out of the wells have a different quality to it because of the low flow?
Yes, during the summertime as the groundwater level is lower, different chemicals and particles concentrate, and we're also pumping at a higher rate, so pulling higher concentrations of various things that you find in water. But most notably, the concern would be ammonia, which we're pulling from the Owen.
Have there been any traces of an MTBE found in the water?
There has in various wells all over town, but none in the town's water supply. And if MTBE were to come through, this plant is built over to all those stuff.
Is that a big problem?
Actually, it's not a difficult problem. Expensive, but no.
Is that from gasoline spills or from car exhaust?
I don't think EPA is really set for that. It's coming from, I think some guess would certainly be spills from gas stations, leaking tanks. Just your everyday normal spills people, filling up their lawnmowers and all the other power tools. Employees of people that all gasoline in this area has some EPE in it. But with some good news is that the EPA is banning that substance and they'll be going to the gas all type of product, which is making corn.
Thanks, Mike. And I'm sure Mike will be around to answer questions for a few more minutes. Right now, Gina Snyder is going to give a presentation. She has a hydrologic model of how a watershed, how an aquifer works. So that'll be very interesting. If you're feeling adventurous, I was actually going to lead anyone who would like to. I'm going to take a walk down this path down here that goes along the old Middlesex Canal down to where Maple Meadow Brook crosses through the old canal. So, some folks I'm sure would like to stay and take a look at the aquifer. If you're feeling adventurous and you'd like a short walk in the woods, you're welcome to join me. I'll just be heading down right over between those two trucks over there. So, you're welcome to stay. And Gina Snyder from the US EPA.
All right.
A container that has rocks in it, like the soil would be. Tip it. Water wants to stay level. Water always flows downhill, and it always tries to seek itself.
First, there was no water near the Middlesex Canal on Maple Meadow Brook, so it was completely dry. So we've got flow coming in, no water right here. Then downstream across from you, Paul, on Route 38, where it crosses Maple Meadow Brook again, Maple Meadow Brook was running backwards into the well fields. So what we saw was flow in, no flow here, and then flow backwards. So, and this we documented from August to November of 1997, and we saw it again in 1999. And so that's kind of what we're seeing with the flow issue in this area. Reading is not a clear picture because there is no flow from Wilmington going into Reading. So we see no flow at the beginning and then we see reversal at the end. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Do you have further? But you have that reversal. When you go from the Gulf Field south to the easterly direction, you have reversal. It's going opposite and then the woods keep going. Right. Oh, okay. Right. So we actually need to leave, and I can talk about this later when I talk as well, and I can talk to you personally. Okay, well, I guess there's a few more handouts here if you want to get them. And, next stop.
Yeah, I think I need to get back on the bus.
Thanks, Gina.
We've done a watershed model we put together, habitat study, and a fish analysis. And I'll be talking about those too. The watershed model is basically a tool, it's a computer model that USGS is putting together for the Department of Environmental Management. And what that will allow the state to do is to look at different water use scenarios. So, okay, if I do this well field, what's the effect on the flow in the river? If I change the wells and move them from one spot to another, what's that effect on the flow in the river? The way the model works, it takes a lot of information to put it together, station data, stream flow data, water use data. And then we have different sites on the river that are called nodes in the model. And when they run the computer model, it tells us what the discharge would be at those spots in the river. And one of the reasons we're here today is that this is one of those nodes, this bridge here, Mill Street Bridge. When they run the scenarios for maybe changing some of the water use up in the Reardon well fields, this is the area downstream where we'll know what the effects of that are. One of the other interesting things about this site is I think we've identified this as one of the first areas in the main stem of the Ipswich that goes dry. It's downstream of the well fields. It's a high ripple area in the stream, and the water kind of backs up all the way through this reach upstream. And when the water drops near those well fields, it shows up in this ripple as being one of the first spots that goes dry. So it'd be without any withdrawals. There's been withdrawals in this river for hundreds of years. And some of the results of that are up on the poster boards. But the nutshell of it is that the water withdrawals, particularly the groundwater withdrawals, have an effect of about an order of magnitude on the stream flow. If it was normally about 10 CFS in the summer, it's about 1 CFS in the summer with the withdrawals. So it's on that order. Maybe if it was, you can see the graph there on the board. I had the good fortune of getting the field portion of the study. One of our first questions that we're going to have when they run the model is, okay, you look at these scenarios and you see what the discharge is in the river, and then they turn to me a little bit and say, well, so what? Does that flow provide enough habitat for the fish and the animals that live in the stream? And of course, the first question we had was, well, what is the habitat? We hadn't been working in the river, so we studied the river up and down and have kind of mapped the different types of habitat. About 70% of the habitat in the river is this forested, kind of closed canopy river, like you might see downstream of here, where, and it's a pretty flat river. We're in the coastal plain of woody debris from the trees that fall in, or the shrubs that hang over the banks, or the undercut banks along the side of the stream. And if you think about those three features, woody debris and undercut banks and shrubs that hang over, those are all habitat features that are associated with kind of a barren sand channel once the stream pulls away from the bank.
That's the beaver dam down here?
There's a beaver dam right under the bridge here, yeah.
That's going to help keep the water level up?
It did. Last year it also dried up here, even though it was a pretty wet year, and the beaver dam kept some water in the stream that wouldn't have been there otherwise, but last year even that evaporated and dried up. And you could walk the channel upstream of here, and I've got some photos of it up on the board. And you could dig your feet down in the sand. You couldn't even get moist sand in the stream bed. It was bone dry. So this is one of the areas we've identified that is important to monitor, because at ripple sites you can see the effects of the stream flows very easily. It'll get real shallow here before you really see the differences, like in this pool downstream of it. The pool here is 8 feet deep or so. It'll be deep even when the stream is dry. It'll be an isolated pool.
Can you just define what a riffle site is?
Well, a riffle, if you walk over here after I'm done talking, you can see it's where there's some slope to the stream, some turbulence on the surface. Usually some white water like you see over there.
So it's very shallow.
It's usually a shallower area
Shallow.
anyway. But you can see the effects of the water level changes there more than you would in other reaches.
What were these walls for?
Pardon?
What were these walls for?
There used to be a mill site here. Or maybe Dave can talk about that briefly. I don't know, but or someone. But this there's actually an old I think an old canal over on the other side of the street here that comes down to the stream that used to be the mill run.
Lobstown Mill. So.
Yeah, it's one of the things we found is in all the tributaries of the Ipswich, there's old mill dams. And a lot of those have isolated those tributaries from the main stem. So fish can't get out of the main stem up into the tributaries and maybe some flowing waters because there's these old mill dams. You know, there were grist mills or sawmills, and those kind of separate the river. One thing a lot of people don't know is that the herring used to run all the way up into Wilmington. There's 3 dams here that, between here and the ocean now that prevent that. The lower 2 have some form of fish passage. The one down in Middleton doesn't. One of the things the Mass Fish and Wildlife was doing was they wanted to come up with a fish management plan for the river. And so they wanted along the whole main stem of the river and a number of the tributaries and found about 21 different species, and it's probably not a surprise that any fish that are left in the Ipswich now are fish that have to be able to tolerate warm water and low flows. And if they're fish that like flowing water or fast water, you don't see many of them. There were 3 species that we saw most of in the river, and those were American eels, redfin pickerel, and pumpkin-seed sunfish. So if you think of sunfish as kind of, and redfin pickerel are kind of pond-type fish that can live in a lot of still-watered areas in the summer, or they wouldn't be here. And there are actually very few fluvial specialist fish like white suckers or fall fish in the stream.
How about shellfish?
Well, there were quite a few mussels in the stream, although they lost a lot of them in this reach from 93 to Reading because it was going dry last year. A lot of fat raccoons and herons walking around.
What about turtles?
You see more turtles in this river, I think, than in a lot of other rivers I've floated in. I don't know why that is, but there's a lot of turtles in this river. There's also some rare species in here. The Blanding's turtle, kind of a yellow-spotted turtle, that lives in the Ipswich.
What's the function of the dams now?
Dam down in Ipswich. There's a dam there by Footborough. There's a livery that backs water up into the Audubon Preserve, and there's one at Boston. And I don't know that any of them have any. Near Boston.
We're beginning discussions about the future of the Bostic Dam. A lot of people who live on the river in North Reading like that higher water. You might want to see the dam stay there. The lower dam, the Sylvania Dam, the same thing. Above that dam is a beach area, and the folks there really aren't going to entertain any ideas about the elimination of the dam. But it's something we can enter into a discussion in the local communities. I'm a big proponent of dam removal when they're not serving any real use. I'm a fisherman.
Yeah, none of the dams serve any, none of them produce hydropower, none of them are used, none of the main stem dams are used for water supply impoundments or anything like
What
that.
about flood control?
They don't help in terms of flood control. The dams aren't designed for that purpose.
So you can take a look. I've got some presentation here from USGS. Basically, we put together a computer model that will allow the state to look at different water use scenarios. We've done a habitat assessment that will allow them to have some idea of how much water perhaps we need in the river to protect the wildlife. And again, they have to maintain some flow over the riffles or maybe some wetted perimeter, wetted stream channel to do that. And we have an indication of what the fish community is like and how that's been impacted by the low flows.
Dave, do you have a gauge set up down there?
A staff gauge, no. I don't.
Okay, but okay.
How long will your study go?
Actually, they're wrapping up now. The model report should be out probably in a couple of weeks. It's at the printers right now. My habitat study will probably be another 6 months before that comes out. But they're pretty much wrapped up at this point.
Middle School. I've been a bird watcher for about 20 years, and I'd like to take a few moments to talk about bird watching along the Ipswich River. First, I'd urge you to think of the river as a corridor, and not only just the river itself, but the surrounding land that the towns have been accumulating to help protect it. And these green corridors act as magnets, not only for birds, but for other wildlife. And all you really need to do is get a field guide, maybe a pair of binoculars. You can just get out there and begin to open up your eyes and ask questions of the birds you see. It's amazing what's out there. In the small amount of time Dave and I were sitting here, we watched the sharp-shinned hawk fly overhead. There were half a dozen juncos in a tree here. There was a song sparrow teed up in the shrub over there singing. There was a robin looking like it was getting ready to build a nest in that white pine there. So very often when you hear about bird walks, I'd urge you to go on a bird sit. Get a comfortable chair and sit along the river someplace, and you'll be amazed at what you'll be able to see. I brought a few birds that I obtained from Mass Audubon. This is one of the most beautiful birds on the river, the wood duck. Past years, they've nested over there. They live in holes in trees, cavities, and they take readily to nest boxes. So that might be something, if you live along the river, you might like to do with some of your neighbors or a scout group or just with your own child. Build a wood duck nesting box and mount it right near the river or even in the river. Folks along 62 in North Reading, there's a lot of wood ducks nesting up back here. A lot of them. I'm sure if you're from North Reading, you've seen many of them. And they're migrating back into this area right now. That is called a wood duck. This is a red-shouldered hawk. This is not the big red tails you see sitting on the highway. This bird is just beginning to return now, and it nests in the swampy areas that will be along the Ipswich River. I've seen a pair of these building a nest again off of 62 out of the swamps that surround the river. And you'll often see them soaring in a high-pitched kia, kia kind of call. And they're, again, just returning from their winter stay down in South and Central America.
What do they eat?
Excuse me?
What do they eat?
These eat big insects, small lizards, snakes, again, small things, frogs, things that frequent the swampy areas. These are not the bird eaters that you might see at your feeders. Though they'll take something, a bird that could be dead. This bird is a wood thrush. Now, I often view birds as a litmus paper to our environment. They can give you some indications as to the health of the environment. Now, when you think Ipswich River, you might not think a wood thrush because they nest in the deep woods. But if a lot of land has been acquired that surrounds the river to protect the river, you may see and hear these. However, in the last decade, the number of these birds has dropped dramatically. And a little flag should go off on our heads and asking why. Is it just the typical up and down cycles of life? Or is it a problem down in South America where these birds nest? Or is it a problem here in Massachusetts, eastern Massachusetts, with habitat or lack of? Or is it a series of problems? How does pollution enter into it? And there's all sorts of ways you as individuals can become involved. There's all sorts of free bird watching surveys that you can participate either online or just by paper and pencil and submit your sightings. And what happens over a period of years, these sightings become a huge database of knowledge. You begin to see flows up and down of population trends and things like that. This is a great horned owl, and you may be hearing them hoot at night, especially if you've got a good stand of woods near your house. These birds have already laid their eggs, and they'll probably be hatching in the next 2 to 4 weeks. Spectacular bird. Okay, I've been informed we need to wrap it up. You are more than welcome to, I lead bird walks here in Reading. We'd like to take a list of the walks with you. My name and number is in the book here in Reading. If you have any questions you want to ask or any interesting sightings, I love to hear from you. Thank you.
Can I just say one thing here? I just wanted to let people know that there's a group called the Essex County Ornithological Club, which has been leading a canoe trip on the Ipswich River to look for birds since the early part of the century, every year since 1906. And they go the mid-weekend in May and go down the river and count birds and record what they've seen. So if anyone is interested in birding, that trip will be coming up in another month and a half, a little under 2 months. So if you're interested, you can call me.